Welcome everyone, distinguished panelists, partners, and participants to our side event alongside the UN General Assembly, Tipping Point, the State of the Amazon and the Bioeconomy Future. By way of introduction, my name is Ilona Szabó. I am co-founder and president of the Mirawa Institute in Brazil, a global think and do tank committed to developing data-driven and evidence-based solutions on issues related to public, digital, and climate security. I'm your moderator for today's session. We are gathered here to discuss solutions to build resilience, avoid irreversible tipping points, and advance sustainable development pathways in the Amazon, which is the world's largest tropical forest spanning over 7 million square kilometers in 8 countries plus 1 territory. As you all know, the Amazon is vital to the stability of the world's climate and home to 10% of all named plant and vertebrate species. If it goes, the Paris Climate Agreement is essentially doomed. The Amazon is not just flora and fauna. It is home to around 47 million people, including nearly 2.2 million indigenous peoples. And as all of you know, the Amazon is facing an existential threat, due in large part to deforestation and degradation. An astonishing 9% of its land clearance is illegal. The Amazon is connected to a global political economy. So the international demand for beef, soy, minerals, wood, and wildlife threatens the ecosystems and biodiversity of the basin. In light of these pressing challenges, the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network convened the Science Panel for the Amazon. The Science Panel for the Amazon is made up of approximately 200 of the world's top scientists who've recently assembled an unprecedented 34 chapters report, a kind of IPCC for the Amazon. It is the first comprehensive accounting of the Amazon of its kind. So in addition to describing the scale of the challenges facing the Amazon, it also sets out a host of bold recommendations to promote conservation and sustainable development. Today, we have an outstanding and renowned group of speakers. So they're here to discuss with us some of the core findings of the panel's report. They're quite honestly among the world's top experts on the issue. They and their colleagues have produced a serious piece of scholarship. It includes hundreds of pages of detailed findings and maps, accompanied by short summaries that we invite you all to read. But they have also created a foundation for action. The report is a warning call to global decision makers. So let me just briefly set out the agenda for the day. So today's sessions will be opened by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the convener of the Science Panel for the Amazon, the president of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and a professor at Columbia University. We'll then turn to representatives of the Science Panel for the Amazon with inputs from key authors and members of the steering committee, including Dr. Thomas Lovejoy, who is known as the godfather of biodiversity for the creation of the term biological diversity in the 1980s. He's part of the Science Panel for the Amazon Strategic Committee, a senior fellow at the United Nations Foundation in Washington, D.C., and a professor at George Mason University. Then we have Dr. Carlos Nobre, also is the Science Panel for the Amazon's co-chair and the Brazilian Earth System scientist. He has been a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and is a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and the World Academy of Sciences. Then we have Dr. Mercedes Bustamante, who is a Brazilian scientist and member of the Science Committee of the Science Panel for the Amazon. She's a professor at University of Brasilia, a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and of the US National Academy of Sciences. She's a lead author of the 6th assessment report of the IPCC and the first regional assessment for the Americas of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And then we have finally Dr. Belén Páez, who is an Ecuadorian ecologist with a master's degree from Universidad Internacional de Andalucía in Spain, and a specialist in climate change and forests from Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar in Ecuador. Currently, she's the director at Fundación Pachamama, created to protect the Amazon and promote the rights and livelihoods of indigenous peoples. Each panelist will speak for approximately 6 to 7 minutes, and finally we'll be taking questions from the participants. So please do send your questions through the chat function. With that, over to you, Professor Sachs, to set the stage for our discussion today.
Ilona, thank you very much, and thanks to all of the participants joining, but my special thanks to the science panel for the Amazon for producing really an absolutely wonderful report. This is the science panel executive summary, and it is so readable, so clear, very moving, because it reminds us of the stunning aspects of the Amazon, from the ancient earth to the current human and biological diversity. And as Ilona has been saying, the incredible fragility of the Amazon right now. Like many things in this world, we're just close to the edge. People who don't know, don't think, don't care, and are driven by power and greed have relentlessly provoked damage and danger to the world, just as we continue up to a precipice. And that's where we are right now. This report makes clear that the Amazon's lost 17% of its rainforest, and another 17% is degraded. So more than a third of the rainforest is already lost or degraded. And what the scientists are telling us, and these are the world's leading experts on this, that this system is close to major ecological transformation in a way that would be devastating for Brazil, devastating for South America, a profound damage and danger for the entire world. And we're very close to that, because the Amazon is a system in and of itself. And when it's degraded, that system, the hydrologic cycle, can collapse. Indeed, even from outside the Amazon, the global warming can change the climate patterns in a way that would dry the Amazon and lead to a massive release of carbon. We already know that parts of the Amazon are now carbon sources rather than sinks. In other words, a tipping point in which the rainforest starts a massive disgorgement of more CO2 into the atmosphere, giving another propulsion to global warming. Today, incidentally, there was a new report out by the World Meteorological Organization and other UN agencies saying that within the next 5 years, we have a 40% chance of having a year at 1.5 degrees Celsius warming or higher. In other words, that upper limit that we said, that's our limit, we could reach this just within the next 5 years. When the world tips to an El Nino and has a surge of warming from the current La Nina conditions, we could have a massive, massive global warming and massive dislocations that result from that. We're at the beginning of a major diplomatic cycle, and that's why this report is so incredibly timely. A week from today is the UN Food Systems Summit, which has in its sights the unsustainability of agriculture, and a lot of the Amazon is suffering from absolutely unsustainable and reckless agriculture, deliberate burning to clear land for soybeans or cattle ranches that will then be abandoned sooner rather than later. So that's next week. Then next month, we have COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the collapse of biodiversity worldwide is on that agenda. Obviously, the situation in the Amazon is front and center. And then we have the G20 at the end of October, and then at the beginning of November, COP26. So this is a moment of truth. And the moment of truth for Brazil is Brazil needs a different direction. and the whole Amazon region needs to put the sustainability of the Amazon, all countries need to put the sustainability of the Amazon front and center. You know, the G20 has become central for finance, and one thing we need to save the Amazon is more financing for ecosystem conservation, for preservation of the Amazon, for sustainable management of the forest. And if Brazil would have a credible voice within the G20, it would make a huge, huge difference. The G20 this year is going to be hosted by Italy in Rome at the end of October, as I mentioned. Next year by Indonesia, another rainforest country. Then India, then Brazil, 2024. So we have 3 years where developing countries are going to be at the helm of the G20, an opportunity for a massive transformation of the global political economy to sustainable development. I know that the SPA and its extraordinary study and its extraordinary set of recommendations will play a central role in helping to guide this process. We need political leadership everywhere that stops the short-term recklessness and stupidity and moves us to where we need to go, away from the precipice and on a trajectory of sustainable development. So thank you. Back to you, Ilona. We have such a remarkable group of experts. I can't wait to hear them.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs, especially for highlighting, I think, the urgency, the critical role of Brazil that needs to change course and protect the Amazon, but also the opportunities for international cooperation and partnerships that are just ahead of us. So now I would like to invite Dr. Nobre, Carlos Nobre. Please tell us more about the tipping point that the Amazon is at risk of reaching.
Good morning to all. Thanks a lot for this very important meeting. Professor Sachs has already raised some of these issues that I will give a little bit more room, which is to try to answer. Could you please, how close, I'm going to talk a little bit more about an assessment, a scientific assessment, how close we are from reaching this Amazon tipping point, in which you see the left portion of this image, the Amazon, as we knew before 50 years, most of the forest was preserved, about 6.2 million square kilometers of forests and diverse ecosystems, most diverse ecosystem in the planet. But we are really perhaps very close to, on the right-hand side here, we see this two stable climate vegetation states, in which the forest will only remain near the Andes, and most of the other portions of the biome will become a very degraded ecosystem. And could you please put the next slide? Yes. What we are seeing, and Professor Sachs has already mentioned, is this very synergistic combination, what we call a domino. It's a domino effect in which many of these global climate tipping elements are interconnected. And what we are seeing, in particular, bringing this threat to the Amazon, is a combination of a warming of the tropical North Atlantic, the Atlantic circulation, the so-called Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which originates in the North Atlantic, the melting of the Greenland ice sheets is making this circulation to be slower. So the North Atlantic, tropical North Atlantic is becoming warmer. It's causing actually the higher frequency of very severe hurricanes in the Caribbean, affecting the US, as we know very well in the last few years, but also this is inducing more droughts in the Amazon. So, and in the Amazon, this increased frequency of droughts is associated with the degradation and the deforestation and the significant increase in forest fires. So this interconnected couple synergistic systems have activated the tipping point for the Amazon biome. Next slide, please. I would just review very briefly what and this is well reviewed in the report that we produced in the science panel for the Amazon. But just let me give you, Professor Sachs also mentioned that we have already something like 17% of more than 1 million square kilometers of deforested areas, another 1 million square kilometers in several stages of degradation, wildfires becoming much more common. And so, so what elements are putting us to say that we are very, very close to this tipping point? And some scientists, in fact, believe the tipping point may have already been exceeded in portions of the Amazon. So I will just review very briefly. We are seeing extreme climate events, droughts and floods, much more frequent, in particularly droughts. Before we would have one severe drought every 20 years. Now we are having 2 severe droughts per decade, 2005, 10, 15, 16, 20. And in 2005, 10, and 20, caused by a warm tropical North Atlantic. We are seeing an overall decrease in rainfall over the Amazon in the last 20 years, which a reduction also of the flow, the wetlands, and the flow of the rivers. Severe increase in vulnerability to wildfires due to this combination of warming, droughts, and forest degradation. The forests in southern Amazon are showing a much stronger reduced water recycling. Of course, a very important characteristic of the Amazon forest is very effective water recycling. A water molecule enters from the Atlantic and it recycles as rain and evapotranspiration, cloud formation, rain again, 5 to 8 times before exiting the basin. Dry season in southern Amazon, eastern Amazon is 3 to 4 weeks longer today compared to the 1990s, especially over the forest areas. The onset of the rainy season is almost at the end of October now in southern Amazon. That area is 2 to 3 degrees warmer during the dry season, 20 to 30% drier. So this is the area under the greatest risk of this change, degradation, disappearance of the forest. Forests are removing much less carbon from the atmosphere. And in fact, in that portion in southern, southeastern Amazon, the forest is a carbon source. This is the most troubling element. And mortality of wet climate tree species is increasing in that area of the Amazon. So, and even some studies show the beginning of animal species typical of the savanna south of the Amazon are starting to move into the southern portions of the Amazon. So putting all these things together, we can say we are very, very, very close to this tipping point of disappearance, perhaps of up to 60–70%. We are only going to have remaining forests near the Andes, where the concave shape of the Andes makes for very, very high levels of rainfall, so the forest will be maintained there. We may lose up to 250 billion tons of carbon dioxide if we exceed the tipping point, reaching the Paris Agreement target of 1.5 almost impossible. So in summary, the rainforest is very, very close to this tipping point, and any nature-based solution pathways require we move to zero deforestation and restoration, sustainable pathways. So I will stop here, and Mercedes certainly will bring ideas on how the solution space can be constructed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nobre. It's very worrisome what you bring. So make us all very responsible. We need to prevent what you're just describing. So I would like to just call on Dr. Bustamante to discuss solutions and to just how to advance sustainable development pathways, including a bioeconomy. Please, the floor is yours, Dr. Bustamante.
So thank you very much, Ilona, for the introduction. And on behalf of the SPA Authors and Steering Committee, we would like to thank the opportunity to be here today. So the next one, please. So the main goal of this presentation is to discuss potential solutions for a system in crisis and also the urgency to address these solutions. We live in a context of multiple and interrelated crises. And Amazonian ecosystems, as presented by previous speakers, and peoples are facing potentially irreversible and catastrophic risks. However, there is a narrow window of opportunity to change this trajectory, but action must be exponential, and it's feasible. We have scalable solutions, and they give better outcomes for society and economy. Next one, please. So the fate of the Amazon is central to the solution to the global crisis. The Amazon represents a large component of the global carbon cycle and is a critical element of the global climate system, and is also home to a notable biological and cultural diversity. The resilience of Amazonian ecosystems is dependent on the complex interactions of its extraordinary, unique, and irreplaceable biocultural diversity. So solutions must consider diversity and complexity. Next one. So multiple pressures are driving deforestation and degradation in the Amazon, and changes are happening at unprecedented rates. So how can we stop this spiral of degradation? The Science Panel for the Amazon mobilized a diverse network of stakeholders across the region in the discussion of a new vision for the Amazon. Next one, please. The elements of a fair and just transformation of the Amazon in the present and the future involves multiple and connected dimensions. These are organized here in 4 major groups converging to the vision of the living Amazon. The dimensions will be presented here with some key examples of interventions. The next one, please. The first component of a fair and just transformation is the empowerment of Amazonian peoples with the recognition and protection of indigenous and local peoples' rights, improvements of livelihoods and well-being, and implementation of knowledge dialogues with public participation in science and support to intercultural education and capacity building. All thus stimulating the cultivation of cultural diversity and gender equality. The next one, please. One example of this dimension is the network Origins Brazil, that supports a collaborative network of indigenous peoples based on ethical trade. Promoting sustainable business in the Amazon, the network involves 34 protected areas, 54 million hectares of standing forest, 43 indigenous peoples and traditional communities, and 28 companies. The next one, with activities distributed in 4 larger territories in the region. The next one, please. The second component involves conservation and restoration of natural ecosystems, including the effective management of the network of protected areas, innovative approaches for conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, so that the resilience and landscape connectivity are restored and maintained. The next one, the network Sementes do Xingu is an emblematic example of how restoration can support a new economy in the region. The initiative promotes seed exchange and trade. In the last 14 years, they trade around 250 tons of seeds from more than 220 native species, involving more than 500 people, mainly indigenous and local communities. The next one. So the potential for bioeconomy is also one of the pillars of a fair and just transformation of the region. To be part of the transformation, the Amazon bioeconomy must be inclusive, connecting diverse knowledge systems. The organization of fair markets must assure the sharing of benefits. And this bioeconomy can stimulate equitable development of rural and urban economies. The next one, please. Many initiatives are already in place using different and innovative approaches. Here are two of them. The next one, please. The first one, Connexus, focuses on the connection between local communities and companies. They involve more than 1,000 community and forest-based business. 250 companies were mapped as potential buyers of forest products. More than 7,000 families and 175,000 hectares were impacted with financing for sustainable productive activities. The next one. The second example is the Mirawa Institute. The institute connects science and local knowledge. The Mirawa-based system of fishery recently achieved concession of geographic indication for the managed pirarucu. Pirarucu is one of the largest freshwater fishes. This seal increased the market value of the products and benefits the communities, stimulating similar initiatives across the region. Next one. However, successful initiatives will demand good governance and financial support, including knowledge-based policies and effective participation of civil society in decision-making. Financial investments must be sustainability-oriented, and in particular, we stress the importance of multilateral collaboration to curb illegal activities. These activities are at the center of environmental damages, conflicts, and violence. The next one. In this context, we call your attention to the recently released report of the Global Witness Organization. This report highlights the record number of murders of forest defenders, and it is striking how this is affecting the Amazon region and its people. The next one. Just some days ago, UN High Commission for Human Rights, Dr. Michelle Bachelet, recognized the deep connection between environmental threats and human rights, repeating her statements. As these environmental threats intensify, they will constitute the single greatest challenge to human rights of our era. We must set the bar higher. Indeed, our common future depends on it. The next one. To conclude our presentation, the vision of the living and sustainable Amazon has to include regional ecosystems and forests to restore and maintain, economies built on the foundation of healthy forests standing, free rivers flowing, and regional societies empowered to conduct this transformation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. It's so important to just highlight the solutions, but also what it will take. So now we would like to hear from Dr. Páez, who will discuss the climate impacts on indigenous peoples, how indigenous peoples have been major stewards of the conservation of biodiversity and carbon stocks. Please, the floor is yours. You're still muted, Dr. Páez.
Sorry. Thank you, Ilona, and thank you very much for everyone that organized this panel today. In effect, definitely when we have heard the latest impacts that climate change is affecting, how much climate change is already affecting the local communities in the Amazon region, is there, is in front of us. I've been in the last quarter traveling around the local communities, and I can witness in Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia how the cycles of the crops are also changing, and how especially the life of women and families are changing too. So everything what has been shared here by the Professor Carlos Nobre and Mercedes and Professor Jeffrey Sachs are like really abundant information on how the tipping point is very close to our lives, to our region, to our economies, to our possible future. And definitely in the Amazon region, this territory has been occupied by the indigenous peoples and communities that they have lived in balance with nature. And especially the arrival and expansion of economic activities foreign to the region brought a series of changes to the way of life of these populations, including serious violations of their human rights. Their priorities for development, as the countries are all the time thinking that this is development, were not respected, nor was neither worldview, and they were enslaved and forced to extract their territory natural resources. So the increase of extractive activities in the Amazon region has caused deforestation and create a lot of tensions over the use of the lands and its resources. In some countries, illicit activities have gained strength, facilitating drug traffic routes, sexual exploitation, and killings. The situation has become even more tense with the development demands associated with infrastructure of mega projects, the expansion of oil frontiers, gas and minerals, and also exploitation of the forest for genetic resources used, construction of dams, and industrial level of fishing and agriculture, among other activities. The impacts of the environment and climate change that has been brought now into the local communities are irreversible, and in general have been imposed on indigenous peoples without respect for the right to consultation and to free, prior, and informed consent. And this is happening over and over for the last decades. The situation was different for some indigenous peoples that decided and were able to flee to remote, hard to access forests and keep themselves in isolation from outsiders. And for many years, these communities have preserved their ways of life. However, today they are in a especially vulnerable situation as the pressure of their lands has intensified and they lack sufficient resources to defend themselves. But there are some recommendations that really are starting to become really, really important decisions that government should make fast in the last months and years and decades. So there is a new political willing that should be very effective, and definitely they need to take decisive steps to strengthen the presence of the state in the Pan-Amazon region without interfering the lives, uses, and customs of indigenous peoples who live there, but in a way that prevents the arrival and encroachment of illegal activity and operators who threaten, harass, and jeopardize the physical integrity of members of indigenous peoples. The state's presence is essential to safeguard the life and the peace of indigenous peoples living in the territory and to prevent illegal activities that go unpunished. We must carry out the measures necessary to implement our strengthened systems designed to provide oversight and monitoring of extraction, exploitation, or development activities important to the Amazon region in a way that this is consistent with human rights obligations. And also it's very important to adopt reasonable measurements to prevent human rights violations in cases in which is known a particular individual or group of individuals faces a real and immediate risk associated with extraction, exploitation, or development activities in the Amazon. I would like to share that there are some great experiences happening around the region. And for example, what we have seen, what happened in Brazil last week with the leadership from Sonia Guajajara, who has been organizing with thousands of indigenous leaders and women's specialists that came from all over the region, from Peru, from Colombia, from Ecuador, to take this step and be in the front lines demanding collective rights for especially demarcation in the case of Brazil, are one of the most powerful examples of how indigenous peoples are really contributing to reverse global warming, to preserve biodiversity, to support livelihoods and biodiversity on the Amazon. As well, several other examples after the pandemic in sanitary situation in the Amazon, many of the groups of the indigenous people have been using their knowledge and using several plants to prepare medicines that help many communities to avoid any damage in terms of their health, but also in terms of mortality. Is that there are many studies that shows that in the Amazon of Peru and Ecuador, the use of the medicinal plants from the forest made in a different ways from different cultures, they have been completely a success, avoiding entire families suffer damage in their bodies and lungs. So there is this answer that is coming from the forest that are really gaining space, and even in the dialogue between the indigenous peoples, the governments, ministries, the bilateral cooperation institutions, as the academic sectors, there's a new way of seeing the urgency. And I think after the pandemic, we have seen that this model of co-creation and innovation of new ways to set up within intention to maintain the living Amazon and in place is like a great experience to see how social movements, indigenous peoples, and the other sectors will be able to approach a new way of do an ecological transition, avoid more economics that will be destroying the Amazon region. I'm referring to all mining, land use change, monocultives, building of dams. And in this way, what I would like to share is that I've been visiting several elders and shamans where are saying to us that they are like spreading this message to the world that we really need to listen carefully to the sacredness, to the watersheds, to the sacredness of the forest. And what we are presenting as an information in the scientific panel is something that indigenous people have been dreaming for many years now, and they have a really clear pathways and solutions to share with the entire world, not just for them to protect themselves and their territories, but also to protect life on Earth. So we must need to be careful on to listen to nature, and especially the Amazon region and their peoples. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belén. And I think especially a special thanks, I think, for highlighting the centrality of the indigenous peoples and the indigenous knowledge to the protection of the Amazon. And we have to understand that they're under serious threats, but not only them, because a threat to them is also a threat to all of us. So thank you for highlighting that. And I would just like to say that unfortunately, due to a last minute unforeseen complication, Professor Lovejoy is not going to be able to join us this time. He'll certainly be in the next panels for the, oh, he's here, he just arrived?
I am here.
Oh, excellent. So with no more of the moderator, I'll just pass to Dr. Lovejoy. And this is a big pleasure because we thought that you could not join today. So please, the floor is yours, Dr. Lovejoy. We're here to hear from you and then to open the floor to our participants.
So I don't think I'm visible on the screen, which may have been my mistake.
We can see you.
Oh,
you're good.
So, so I apologize for being slow. So I just sort of struggling with some medical stuff. So, I mean, basically, what we have going on is essentially a major continental scale ecosystem tipping point and collapse around the Amazon. we've all talked about it, so I don't need to belabor the point, but it's all about what trees and leaves do, especially in the Amazon forest, which is promote the evaporation of water into the hydrological cycle and the transpiration from the leaves. So that is key to the cycle which you heard us talk about before, which basically provides moisture to every country in South America except for Chile. And we're seeing drought, we're seeing changes in vegetation, we're seeing changes in dry season length and temperature of the dry season. So basically what you're seeing is the beginning of what could be a major shift in the southern and eastern Amazon, which then would extend beyond where it's most noticeable right now and affecting agriculture. Anyway, so basically we're seeing the ecological system of South America begin to come apart, and it's happily something we can do something about because we know what trees do, we know what leaves do. They're very powerful movers of water. And so if we engage in a proactive reforestation, particularly in the southern and eastern Amazon, we should be able to stabilize that hydrological cycle and avoid the major tipping point. So that obviously has implications for everybody who lives there, most especially indigenous people, but also all the agriculturalists who in a way have caused this to begin to happen. So the only way out of this is for everybody to get together and work proactively on restoring the hydrological cycle. And I would say that any scientist you talk to who knows anything about this will be in total agreement. And anybody who's been looking at what the implications are for agriculture know that it's incredibly important for Brazil to stabilize that system. So I'm not sure I actually need to say more than that because we've all been talking about this for quite some time. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lovejoy. And I think you add so much to this discussion, the weight that it has to have and the urgency that I think we all that are in this event and beyond, we all need to do something. So thank you for joining. And now we'll open the floor to questions. I have a few here already, so I also encourage other participants to send in the chat or Q&A function. So I'll start with a question to Dr. Nobre, but also to Dr. Lovejoy to comment. It's from Norman Brewer. Can Dr. Nobre comment on passing the tipping point as likely to interrupt the river of air or transport of humidity from the Amazon to Southeast South America? an important breadbasket for the world. So exactly the point that Dr. Lovejoy was just mentioning now. So could you both comment a little more on this?
Can I start?
Please.
Please.
Yes, if the tipping point is really reached, exceeded, and we will lose 60–70% of the Amazon forest, so the water recycling will be reduced significantly, and therefore the flying rivers, this moisture transport to the south, feeding rain and snow on the Andes and the rainfall systems south of the basin, particularly in Southeast South America, the La Plata River basin, will decrease. It will not disappear because it's still the atmospheric circulation will continue to be, and the Andes certainly will continue to force the winds to turn south. But the moisture transported by these aerial rivers will reduce. For instance, 18% of the rainfall on the La Plata Paraná River basin comes from moisture from this aerial river. So we are going to see a reduction of rainfall in those systems, and particularly in Southeastern South America, there will be a more severe dry season. So it's very certain it will be a very significant economic impact in that area of South America.
Very important.
Ilona, I believe you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking if Professor Lovejoy wanted to complement Dr. Nobre.
No, actually, I mean, I think he stated it quite clearly. It's a very, very serious continental scale challenge. It's not impossible to fix, but we've got to get it together.
Thank you. So I'll just have another question here from the chat from Samir Pesaya. How can we be talking about bioeconomy if there is a large threat, especially in Brazil, about the weakening of public agencies and their tools? How can bioeconomy be strengthening public agencies? And how can bioeconomy really be inclusive, bringing the knowledge of the communities to the public policies? So maybe Dr. Mercedes and Belén wants to start, and of course, all the panelists should weigh in.
Thank you, Ilona, and thank you, Samir, for the question. As we show in the presentation, when we talk about the fair and just transformation of the Amazon, we have this 4 dimension of these 4 pieces of the puzzle. And one of them is governance, and this includes also the effort to stop all illegal activities. This is key, and this includes stopping deforestation and activities that are related to forest degradation. And that demands good governance. We have to have the public sector working right there, trying to curb these activities, and also does require a responsible political leadership. I think these are important conditions to implement a new economy in the region. So about the bioeconomy and how the bioeconomy can be inclusive, I think this is also important aspects, so an enable condition. And we have very good examples in the region, as we tried to show. This is just a few of a lot of different initiatives. And we are learning from these examples on how to do that in a more inclusive way. But you are right, we need actually to have a good governance in place so that we have the discussion about the legal aspects of the bioeconomy. This is a big issue now, also is a hot topic to discuss in the next convention of the biological diversity, how we can have benefit sharing in a fair way for mega diverse countries. So, but as I said, there are good examples there. We need to scale these examples. But first of all, we need to stop with the illegal activities, especially illegal mining, illegal deforestation, protect indigenous rights that to show here. This is the basis of the change and the transformation we need to implement. Thank you.
Just to add on that, I would like to tell some examples in the ground. We have seen that definitely that there are many opportunities regarding what we like really to call the economies from the forest economies concept, and also economies for life. So in Ecuador and Peru, we have seen indigenous peoples in their local communities working in orchids, vanilla, for example, production, guayusa, cacao, and some other products that are coming from the forest to support their livelihoods and to support their food sovereignty, but also they are able now to expand their economies out of the subnational provinces. And there's a new collaboration and systems where really becoming an economic opportunities in the forest to avoid deforestation, to avoid land use transformation. And these, let's say, these activities are not in a big scale. So definitely the government of Ecuador and the government of Peru are promoting, and they're investing into these kind of activities. And we have seen so far lately in the last 5 years, investors like B Corp investors that would like to support this kind of investment in these kind of places, especially with indigenous peoples. So when I'm referring to co-creation and new ways to adapt, to have an adaptive learning on what is possible to go into this ecological transition that will impact our economies and the way that we see the Amazon from outside and from inside.
Thank you very much, Belén. There's a question here also to Professor Lovejoy on how much land should be reforested by when to restabilize the hydrological system.
So I think basically in the end, it has to be 20% restored. Because the forest is still being destroyed. So it's not like that stopped and now we're working on it, right? So I think the most important thing is to understand that the system requires all of that forest to be restored, in part because it takes a while for that moisture to come back. And we don't want to play any games with this continental phenomenon. But I think there's another really important point that has to be made. And it's one that Carlos makes very eloquently, which is a Amazon forest bioeconomy has to be an economy that does not replace forest with plantation, does not replace rivers with major hydroelectric plants, and also has to be looked at in an integrated way so that infrastructure is viewed through a sustainability lens, not through the old-fashioned ways we've done it before.
Would you like to complement Dr. Nobre?
I just want to say I fully agree, but of course, I mean, there is a more fundamental question here, which has a lot to do with finding sustainable solutions for climate change and for saving the tropical forests, and particularly the Amazon, which is really, we have to change our diets. We have really to consume much less meat, particularly beef. Of course, I mean, more than 90% of deforestation in the Amazon and forest degradation is associated with production of beef industry and soy as animal feed. So really, you know, this is a major driving force behind deforestation, also forest degradation in addition to selective logging. So globally speaking, and of course, you know, there is a lot of emissions by cattle, methane emissions. So, you know, it's not a simple issue, but we have really to make global societies aware, particularly the youth, that changing diets is very important. We have to consume much less meat in general, and particularly from cows, from cattle. And if we do that, then the driving force behind deforestation in the global tropics will reduce significantly.
Thank you. It's a very important reminder that all of us can do something, even if we're not scientists or government or companies. As citizens, we have a big role. So there's another question here from Enrique Casol. In your opinion, which short-term actions should be prioritized to avoid further devastation of the Amazon? So I'll just invite whoever feels moved with the question to start, please.
I would say that, if you allowed me, Ilona, that the first step is compliance with environmental law. So if you check the environmental law in our countries in the Amazon region, we have good laws, but we need to enforce this law. I think that's the first step, is to say it's important to follow the law. So if you have side by side legal and illegal activities, it's quite difficult, very hard for legal business to compete with illegal business. So, and if they will have this regulation there, we really need the public power do job and stop illegal deforestation in the region. I think this is the first point, as we mentioned here in the two presentations from Dr. Carlos Nobre and Dr. Thomas Lovejoy. We are there reaching this tipping point, and after this tipping point, it's quite difficult to project what's coming next. So this is what we are trying to avoid, and we have the elements there, but we need the responsible leadership and the political will to implement the law that is already there.
And adding what Mercedes just has said, indigenous peoples are really in the front lines asking for the protection of their collective rights, and also to acknowledge and recognize the rights of nature and their interaction. And even that in different countries, there are different environmental policies regarding climate change and environment, etc. Indigenous peoples are aware that there is the need to combine and to integrate environmental policies with social policies, with ensuring, especially indigenous territories, collective rights. And there is also this ask by the indigenous people to the world that is very important to also see a narrative that is an urgent narrative, because there is an argument, scientific arguments, that we are getting into this point that we will not have any return back. But there is also this narrative of possibilities. So indigenous people have said that there is 10 years in the next decade that are, if people start like shifting in a way that will be doing much more understanding and integration of collaboration at multi-level sectors, it will be a possibility to contribute to avoid the disaster that's coming, but also avoid deforestation and promote more social justice ways to see indigenous peoples and other in our region. So that this is the call also from the forest and from the sacredness. And I would like to share that with all of you.
Thank you, Belén. So Dr. Nobre, Dr. Lovejoy, would like to, there are many other questions, but would you like to weigh in on this one?
So, you know, I think there's some really interesting and creative things that can be done in terms of improving the quality of life of people in the Amazon, particularly the Ribeirinhos, who have a pretty adequate lifestyle, but they would really benefit from broadband for education and for health.
I just want to add one more element, which is, you know, Mercedes has already brought this issue up, but you know, there are many good examples in the Amazon in which agroecological systems are much more productive and benefit the local population much more 100 times better than cattle ranches or soy production. Let's say the profits coming from the traditional agriculture and livestock farming, crops, and select logging does not remain in the Amazon. That goes out of the Amazon, does not benefit the Amazonian people. So this new bioeconomy of standing forests, flowing rivers bioeconomy is a bioeconomy which will be centered around the local populations. They will be the population benefiting and improving their livelihoods. So I think we have to have a global effort to promote this new bioeconomy. We have to have consumers all over the world adding value to this new bioeconomy, desiring to acquire products coming from the standing forest and agroecological systems, also from indigenous groups. So this is something that we have really to make it happen much more quickly if we want to stop deforestation and land and forest degradation.
Thank you, Professor. There's a question connected to what you're saying, so I'm going to pick it from the chat. So what is the potential to restoration to be a key bioeconomy activity, considering the amount of land in need to be a forest again, and how to make private efforts to converge on that goal?
And maybe I can start with this question, Ilona. Yeah, thank you for the question. This is really a critical point. And if you check the new IPCC report, the 6th cycle of the IPCC, we really need to enter in an era of negative emissions. And this implies that we are going to foster activities that can capture carbon and store carbon. And restoration is a good example of that. So we should try to combine this agenda, all the climate investments, and how we can drive this climate investment to the restoration of the tropical forest. But to do that, again, the first point, our first duty is to establish a good governance. It's not just to flow money into the region, but they have to have money in the right hands for the right activities with good results. I think this is a critical point. And we have to think that restoration is a long-term activity with multiple purposes. So we can use different technologies, different approaches for the different objectives of the restoration. So I think that's the first point, and that science can help a lot with that, is establish what are the restoration priorities, what are the best technologies, and how we can involve and consult with local people to see what are the best ways to move forward. But again, if you want to use climate investments or climate funds for that, one critical issue for these funds is to guarantee the carbon permanence. So we cannot plant forests and let the forests burn the next day. So this must be connected again with the set of policies that is going to assure that forests will withstand that for a long time. So I think this is the critical issue, the context that we need to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. I couldn't agree more. Would you like any of you to complement Mercedes?
I just want to add, there are a number of good examples in which local populations, they abandoned cattle ranches and started developing agroecological systems for acai berry, for cacao, and many other products. And so they, for acai berry, for instance, that started in the 1990s, cacao 10 years ago. So those agroecological systems, the forest is being restored. So of course it's a secondary forest, it's not a primary forest, but mature secondary forest holds about 70 to 80% of carbon, perhaps 65% of biodiversity, and provides those communities with economic gain, and they improve their livelihoods. So that's, I think, part of the forest restoration. I think most of the forest restoration has to be to restore a forest, but part of that could be really creating a very large number, tens of thousands of agroecological systems all over the Amazon, and that would benefit, of course, through carbon credits in creating ways, also not easy ways for the carbon credits to benefit the local populations, but also creating this new bioeconomy that would certainly, we have many good examples showing they are improving their livelihoods. Of course, if you ask the question, can standing forest bioeconomy generate Amazonian society of middle class? Not yet. For middle class, you need to add value to the forest products. So we need really to bring science, technology, and even local knowledges to add value in the supply chains of the forest products. So this is still a challenge that science technology has to overcome.
Thank you so much. There's a question here to you and Professor Lovejoy on the tipping point. So is there some hope that if the tipping point is crossed, part of the Amazon will survive, such that recovery may be possible by recolonization of forests from the surviving part to the collapsed part?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's not too hard to actually measure it. You can measure the number of trees. You can measure the amount of foliage cover, and you can get some kind of measure for moisture generation. And presumably over time, that will improve.
Thank you, Professor Nobre.
Yes, but the big challenge is really changing the economic model, because, for instance, in the Brazilian Amazon, 23% of all the more than 800,000 square kilometers deforested, they've been abandoned mostly by formerly cattle ranches. And so the forest there is regenerating. There are areas where more than 30 years, the forest is naturally regenerating. So, so we have that big challenge, and Mercedes has brought that also very clearly. We have to have a governance. We have really to try find strong ways. Society has to put a lot of pressure to avoid the crime, the environmental crime, which is, at least in Brazil, more than 90% of deforestation is all illegal, it's a crime. So stopping the crime has been a major challenge, really, to constructing a sustainable pathway for the Amazon.
Thank you. But just the question I think asked also, if the tipping point is reached, can regeneration be possible? Because I think this is an important point that we would love to hear more from you and Professor Lovejoy.
I don't think we have the complete or total answer to that. Usually in issues related to climate change, as the IPCC report has shown, the intensification of reaching tipping points is usually much more quickly than what science in some point figured it out. For instance, the melting of the Arctic ice sea. 20 years, 30 years ago, in the initial IPCC report, it said it would happen only in the 22nd century. Now we know it's going to happen before 2050. So I'm just giving you this example just to say that, ideally speaking, we should immediately start reforesting and zero deforestation. I'm not sure we can say that if the tipping point is exceeded, as we are starting to see that unfolding in southern Amazon, then 50% of the forest will naturally become degraded even without further deforestation. And if we go there and reforest everything, then the Amazon forest will come back. Probably not, but this is not a fully scientific assessment. It's my more impression that because the dry season is becoming lengthier, and if the dry season in 50-60% of the Amazon exceeds 4 months, then the new type of vegetation will be adapted to this new climate. And it will be very difficult to restore, to create a new forest if the climate becomes very dry, more characteristic of a savanna-like climate.
Thank you so much. So that's why we need to avoid it badly. It's too big a risk. We don't want to face that. So there's a question here that I think Belén could help us with. Can you highlight how important are biocultural approaches to sustainable development? Or is there an example of successful biocultural approach, like a case study in the Amazon region? There's a question from Zuhail.
Yes, I would like to address this answer in two different parts. In one hand, adding in what Carlos and Mercedes were saying is that we definitely need to encourage governments to stop amplifying, expanding industrial activities in the forest, in biodiverse forest, in the region, in the basin, in the different areas. So starting to see the Amazon as a place that is not no longer a place who's going to be sacrificed and will be open to the end of the times where everything is going to be extracted. So in that way, indigenous peoples being in the front lines and executing collective rights and asking the governments to stop and to put moratoriums into the soy expansion territories, into the oil mining. That's one way to approach restoration in the long term. So if we are taking this kind of measurements of public policies stopping expansion of industrial activities in the Amazon, that will contribute also to diminish the impact that will be happening in the next years. And in the other side, there are like a need to acknowledge and to support the raising up of the new ecosystem of governance, where power will be changed in the whole region, and more participation will be coming up from the community sectors, from the academic sector, from the civil society, from people who's living in the Amazon, indigenous and not indigenous peoples. So every time we see us in the region in regarding to the world, we will remind the people that Amazon is not just to become a sacrifice place in earth. And there are many, many amazing examples of opportunities that local communities have been raising up regarding bioeconomy projects already, that in 5 years from now, they will be becoming a hub, a network of bioproducts and superfoods for the world that will be really well acknowledged in the markets, in the sustainable markets in Europe and America and different places. And just to end my intervention, I would like to mention that last week at the IUCN Conservation Congress, there was this 159 nomination that acknowledged, recognized the importance to protect the 80% of the Amazon basin by 2025. Although this is an ask, this is a campaign, global campaign from civil society and indigenous people, this can be something that can be starting to change the game for the next COP and for the next years. So there is like a value on the movement, social movements around the world supporting the Amazon efforts to create possibilities to stop deforestation, to avoid destruction. And I think that's what we need to also come out with some more solutions. Like the world is watching the Amazon, and there are many ways to have a global movement that will encourage the governments and put all the eyes into the governments, to ask the governments to stop this way of seeing economics over the Amazon.
Thank you so much, Belén. And we're getting to the end here. So there's a final question that I'll combine with the second one to pass to Professor Nobre to wrap up. So is carbon trading a potential solution for financing forest protection and restoration in the Amazon rainforest? If so, how can it be done in a just, inclusive, and effective way? And just adding to that, there's a question that from Rafael Loyola that you'd like to hear on the effectiveness of market-based regulation tools, such as the soil moratorium, and if it could be extended to other commodities in the region. So.
Well, that sounds like a very good idea to me. Let's put the brakes on the things that are pushing the tipping point while we try and figure out what we can do.
Perfect. Would anybody would like to comment on carbon, Mercedes?
Yeah, I can try to address that. It's a complex point. It's a good question. I think when we talk about market initiatives, markets have failures. This is why you need also public policies. I think the main message here, there is no silver bullet. We need all the options. But when we talk about like initiatives like the soil moratorium, we have to consider the impacts of the leakage effects to the other ecosystems or other biomes. So we also need to follow up these initiatives and see if there are other impacts of externalities that are outside the region. So, and when we talk about business, we have to consider that they cannot be sustainable based on the biome or ecosystem they are there. So we have to need to consider that is a part of the business in all parts of the world. And another point about the carbon trade is this is the same, how we can guarantee that it's fair and just, equitable, and all this issue. And also we need to consider when we talk about carbon trading or carbon markets, respect to indigenous and local communities, this is quite an important aspect. So, and also the conservation of biodiversity. So we cannot trade rights, water, biodiversity per carbon. This is not a good deal at all. So I think this is the points. And also, when I talk about carbon in forests cannot replace the decarbonization in other sectors of the economy. So as the low-hanging fruit is there, we can apply, but we also need to transform the other sectors of our economy to be successful. So I would say it's a way to go if you take care about the trade-offs and if you consider all the assumptions that are necessary to be just and fair again. So protection of rights, protection of biodiversity, protection of water. So I think this is the points that we should keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any comments, Professor Nobre or Belén?
I just want to add that also one of the issues about carbon credits that now there are many mechanisms, particularly one I want to mention is the so-called architecture of REDD+ transactions. I'm a member of the board, which has developed this system for countries and also subnational jurisdictions to apply for carbon credits for all tropical forests. And the Norwegian government is offering $10 per ton of carbon dioxide reduction of deforestation, increasing forest removals through restoration of forests, and also valuing countries with high levels of forest and low levels of deforestation. So that has the potential, these studies conducted by this project show a potential of tens of billions of dollars flowing every year for tropical countries reducing deforestation. The major doubt is whether this flows of funding coming from carbon credits, from reducing deforestation, increasing removals, carbon removals from restoration, how to benefit local populations, how to benefit this new bioeconomy. So this is still a big question mark that we have to find ways to make the carbon markets really sustainable in a way to benefit the Amazonian populations. So this is still open question. We have to find ways of governance to create this new bioeconomy, including the funding of these new initiatives coming from carbon credits.
Absolutely.
Would you like to comment on that, Dr. Lovejoy?
No,
Final word?
no, it's one thing to make a generality of what needs to be done, and it's another thing, as Carlos was pointing out, to actually make something work. So one needs to pay attention to the detail.
And just to add is that in any kind of assembly and in the guidelines of principles that indigenous peoples in each organization they have written down in the last years, they have some principles real clear about markets, carbon markets, and about nature-based solutions. So they refer into, I will say, the economic system, the actual economic system is not going to solve any of the problems that will be happening over the years in the Amazon. So more than against of what are carbon markets and nature-based solutions, there is a debate, a conversation, a dialogue that should be happening in the next decade, that it will turn into the new economic system, which is regarding about how, for example, external debt into the Amazonic countries are really severe, And the way that Ecuador, Peru, Colombia are paying external debt is also related to the extraction industries threatening the Amazon. So there is this connection in between our economies, our system, and how the externalities of economics are affecting the Amazon, and how also indigenous people have said that these are not solutions at all. And that's why we need to keep thinking on what Carlos just mentioned, new ways and solutions that will change the way that we can connect with other alternative systems of economics for the Amazon and for the world.
Thank you so much, Belén. So we unfortunately are getting to the end of our panel, and I'd like to invite Professor Nobre to wrap up our event. So thanks to the fantastic group of speakers and to all of you for your participation. So please, Professor Nobre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ilona. Thank you very much for your conducting beautifully this event. Thanks for all the participants. Thank you for Professor Jeffrey, Mercedes, Belén, and Professor Lovejoy as well. I think it was a very important discussion on sustainable ways, on how urgent it is for the planet, all of us, not only the Amazonian countries, but primarily the Amazonian countries, take very quick new policies, new governance to create a new bioeconomy and to stop deforestation and forest degradation and fires. This is a major challenge, a gigantic, gargantuan challenge, but we cannot really escape facing this challenge. And the Science Panel for the Amazon is one initiative that is urgently addressing many of these issues. And as you said in your introduction, Ilona, we are more than 200 authors, including indigenous leaders as authors, stakeholders, and we are approaching the finalization of this report. And I want to announce to all of you that on Monday, the summary of keynote messages for all the 34 chapters, more than 200 authors, will become available. I think on Monday in English, but very soon in Portuguese and Spanish. And all of you participating in this webinar will receive a copy of that. And so please make sure that you take a close look at that. You're going to see the key messages of what this, and the report will be published in a couple of months. There are more than 2,000 pages. And we hope the Science Panel for the Amazon will be a very important driver for a new Amazon that we need. We need really to save the Amazon. That's the Amazon we want. But the Science Panel is really working very hard for 2 years to produce a rigorous scientific assessment, but also proposing sustainability pathways for the future. So thanks again, thank all of you. Thank you, Ilona.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for all your efforts and all the work that you all are doing. Thank you very much.
So have a nice day. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.